Certain and Uncertain, Chapter 10, Regalia. A month passed before any of them could blink. Victor and Ethan moved back to Bellwood, to a house not too far from Jen's. Victor had been reinstated as a plumber with an apology on file from Max for his dismissal. Ethan had been given status as a plumber in training, overseen by the two most active plumbers on Earth, Gwen and Kevin. Along with the supervision of the wielder of the Omnitrix, he was well on his way to kicking alien ass, even without powers. Currently, though, he was getting his ass handed to him in Sumo Slammer SmackDown 3. Ha! Take that! Jen cried out, bouncing on her bed. Ethan laughed as his character dissolved into pixels. You got me. He stood and gave her an over-exaggerated bow. She laughed and tossed a pillow at him. He barely caught it, and his eyes lit up. Oh, is that how it's gonna be? He swung the pillow at her as she shrieked out a laugh. She snatched another pillow off the head of her bed to parry his blows. Both of them dissolved into laughter as they rolled and wrestled. It ended with Jen sitting on top of him, pillow in both hands held over her head, ready to strike. Come on, say it. Ethan laughed. Okay, you're the best sumo samurai. She grinned and tossed the pillow aside. It was only then that they seemed to realize the position they were in. Jen blinked and went bright red. He caught her hand before she could move. The room around them went still, and he leaned upward as she leaned down. They were barely an inch apart when a bright light flashed in the corner of a room. Jen leapt from the bed, breaking from his grip easily and spinning the dial on the Omnitrix. Peace, brave one. I mean you no harm. The figure now standing in front of Jen's TV was tall. He had to crouch slightly to not hit his head on the ceiling. His skin was lightly scaled, and he was dressed in bright blue robes. He bowed. Jen stood up straight. Hi. Who are you and why are you in my room? The alien bowed again. My name is Sirith. I am an ambassador of the Dracolic Empire. I am humbled to be in your presence. He bowed again, and Jen managed a strained smile. Thanks. Can I offer you a drink? Ethan had to muffle his laughter behind his hands. No, thank you, noble warrior. You are most gracious host. I am here to present you with the highest honor my people can bestow upon a being for your victory against the Highbreed. Jen's smile grew a bit more strained. You really don't have to. Humble and powerful. A rare combination. The alien pulled a package from his robe and opened it carefully. It contained a medal about the size of Jen's face. She shook her head slightly, but bowed back and tried not to let on how heavy the medal was as it was placed around her neck. The universe owes you a debt we can never repay. You are the hero of 1,000 worlds. Jen smiled awkwardly and thanked the ambassador again. He vanished in another flash of light, and Jen sagged under the weight of the metal, which thunked against the hardwood floor. Ethan burst out laughing. Jen glared at him as she managed to pull off the medal and walked over to her closet. Laughing at me is just mean, Ethan. He couldn't stop, though, she sighed. It's not like I do this to get famous. Come on. Ethan managed to catch his breath. No, you do it 'cause you're an adrenaline junkie. Jen glared, but shrugged as she kicked open her closet. Ethan stared incredulously. It was covered in medals and trophies. Jen shook her head, setting the ridiculously large medal on top of the pile, which teetered and threatened to fall. She closed the closet, resolving to do something with them later. And because it's the right thing to do, she insisted. But he shook his head, laughing again. He knew that at least part of it was the high she got from being able to do things no one else could. She'd told him as much the night she'd gotten drunk at her grandfather's fishing spot, and revealed the truth behind her worst scars. She turned to keep arguing with him, but she caught sight of the alarm clock on her bedside table and swore. We're late! She grabbed her shoes and threw Ethan's at him. He glanced at the clock and grimaced. They were supposed to have met Gwen and Kevin to check out a series of break-ins near a factory on the edge of town an hour ago. Jen's phone buzzed. She answered it frantically. Gwen! Shit! Yeah, I can hear that. I'm so sorry. We lost track of time. We're on our way now. Ethan pulled on his shoes and grabbed his jacket as Jen took off out the bedroom door. Ethan followed close behind. She clicked off the call and tossed him his helmet. "Gwen's gonna kill us." He let out a laugh as they ran for Ethan's bike. Meanwhile, in the deep recesses of a spaceship just coming into Earth's orbit, a plot was being hatched. Long, thin fingers tapped on the arm of the chair as red eyes overlooked the three gathered in front of him. "My master is set to battle the Tennyson spawn within the next 2 days. I am keen she should never reach this battle." Chattering sounds responded from one of the metallic figures. This one was red. A second metallic voice laughed. "Got no faith that he can beat her, even with all the powers he's taken," Siphon hissed, and pointed his hand at the offending mercenary. A blast of red sent the mercenary to what passed for his knees. "Do not speak ill of my master, Crab." The chittering sounds went off again as Crab pulled itself to its feet. 6-6 has a point. If you have so much faith, why hire us to take her out before the fight?" Siphon tapped his fingers against the chair again. "The child has grown much more powerful than my master realizes. If what my spies tell me is true, then she has, with that cur Azimuth's help, restored whole populations of worlds decimated in the brief war with the Highbreed. I will not have my master made a fool of. Kill the girl, but leave the Omnitrix whole if you can." They nodded and vanished, teleporting to the planet below. Chapter 11, Blast from the Past. Pierce was not having a good day. Dragging his unconscious sister back into the rust bucket as he nursed a likely broken wrist was surprisingly not the worst of his problems right now. The team had just had their asses handed to them by a figure from one of Max's stories. Or more accurately, Max and Jen's stories. "He really did have a squid-like face," Pierce mused as he managed to set his sister down on the floor. He couldn't lift her with one arm. Manny was next in the RV, supporting Max. The elder plumber groaned as Manny set him down on the driver's seat. Alan and Cooper came in last, supporting each other. Alan was shivering slightly and Cooper was shaking. They collapsed into the seat at the rust bucket's table. Pierce pulled out the med kit and wrapped his wrists, using his teeth to tear the bandage. "Here, Manny, trade me spots." The Tetraman nodded and stepped over to Helen, picking her up and putting her in the bottom bunk, his hands shaking. What are we supposed to do?" Alan asked, his voice shaking. Cooper shook his head. "I miss my lab." Pierce shot a glare at the blonde as he patched up the bruise on Max's head. "There's nothing we can do," Max said, startling Pierce. He thought the old man had lost consciousness. "Vilgax issued a Conqueror's challenge. If we interfere, it could void the challenge and we lose the planet." "So what, we just let Jen fight him?" Pierce said incredulously. Max looked up at him and the spiky teen flinched. Max didn't want to send his granddaughter out against that monster any more than any of them did. But they had no choice. "Haven't seen these two in a while," Gwen called out from behind her shield. Jen rolled her eyes. After dealing with the thief at the factory, a being calling itself Serpent, they had gone out for smoothies, Jen's treat. For losing track of time and leaving Kevin and Gwen to fight that thing for the past hour. But of course it was never that simple. They'd been attacked in the parking lot by two figures that they recognized. They were bounty hunters who'd come after Jen when she was a child. But this time Tetrax wasn't with them. Unfortunate, really. They could use the help. Ethan dove behind Kevin's car, pulling out his sidearm and taking a deep breath. Kevin wrestled Crab, absorbing his armor and ripping apart the large claw that was his main weapon. Jen spun the Omnitrix and screamed as a lucky shot from 6-6 struck the dial of the watch. Gwen cried out in rage as green lightning crackled and sparked, hiding her cousin from view and sending debris flying. 6-6 went crashing through the street into the gas station across from the Mr. Smoothies. The explosion was a sight to see. Ethan was sure that if they'd been closer, he'd have lost his eyebrows. But the screaming still coming from the bright ball of green lightning that had been Jen was much more concerning. Gwen was trying to contain the explosion from the gas station, so Kevin ran straight towards the ball of light. Ethan took to his feet to follow, but the lightning sparked again, and then the light exploded, sending everyone flying. Ethan sailed backwards into the wall of the smoothie shop, and his world went black. When he came to, he blinked. Sirens were sounding from across the street, but no one seemed to be paying any attention to the Mr. Smoothie, likely because it wasn't currently on fire. It was partially collapsed, though. He shook his head and sat up, only to jump at a chittering shriek that sounded above him. He looked up into bright green eyes of Jen's transformation that she called Spider Monkey. He let out a breath. "Jen, you're okay." The blue four-armed chimp chittered at him and shrieked again. Then it took off across the rooftop and out of sight. "Where are you going?" He pulled himself to his feet and stumbled slightly, his ears still ringing. A groan caught his attention. It sounded like Kevin was buried under part of the roof of the building. Shit. Ethan started digging as some of the rubble began to move. He blinked in surprise as a stone hand pulled itself out of the rubble, followed by chromastone. "Jen?" "Over here," Gwen called out. Chromastone took off at a run as green goop seeped from the roof. Gwen was dragging her cousin around the corner. She looked barely conscious, pale, and there was some blood leaking out from between her lips. Ethan swore and made to step over to them when Goop caught him by the foot, tripping him headlong. Jen's eyes snapped open as the Omnitrix whirred and flashed yellow. Circuits reached out from the watch, covering Jen's skin, the yellow leaking into her eyes as she reached out and grabbed Ethan by the hand. With inhuman strength, she yanked him past her and released him, instead latching onto Goop, still around his ankle. The green sludge flashed yellow and vanished, along with the circuits on Jen's skin and whatever strength she had found. Ethan barely caught her as she went limp. "Jen?" Ethan carefully flipped her over, but she was completely unresponsive. He turned to Gwen. "I think Kevin's buried under the debris." A fresh groan from the rubble backed up Ethan's statement. Gwen stood, eyes glowing, and the whole building lifted off of Kevin, crashing down around him. Gwen gasped, and Ethan swore under his breath. "I just got a building dropped on my face. I'm gonna look a little rough around the edges." Gwen shook her head at her boyfriend as she fished the mirror out of her purse. Her hands were shaking as she handed him the mirror. Kevin gasped as he looked at his face. He was covered in several different materials. A quarter of his face was coated in tadenite. The rest of his face, along with his upper chest and left arm, were coated in stone. His right arm and the rest of his torso were covered in metal. His legs coated in wood. He was still wearing part of his jeans, ripped and torn into shorts. "No, not again!" He turned and nearly dropped the mirror as he spotted Jen, still not moving, in Ethan's arms. "What happened?" "That's exactly what I would like to know." The voice made them all turn. Standing atop the destroyed wall of the Mr. Smoothie was Azimuth in all his 2-foot glory. Gwen let out a sigh, though she wasn't sure if it was with relief or not. 6-6 got in a lucky shot, hit the dial of the watch before she could transform. There was green lightning. It knocked us all out. Kevin was closest when it happened. Azimuth barely spared the Osmosian a glance as he hopped over to Jen. Then Goop was out of the watch. Goop grabbed Ethan. Jen came to and did the thing that happens when the watch is fixing DNA, except it was yellow. Goop disappeared and she passed back out. Azimuth shook his head as he looked over the watch. "Your assassin shot was glancing, luckily. I can repair this easily enough. However, several of her transformations have escaped the watch. She retrieved Goop. It is likely she can retrieve the others as well." Gwen frowned. "I sense a butt heading our way." Azimuth shot Gwen a condescending look. "However, Jen is experiencing not only the damage to the Omnitrix as a physical wound, but the loss of her transformations as well. The Omnitrix is the only thing that can capture them. She is missing—" Ethan cut in. "Chromastone and Spider Monkey?" Azimuth nodded. "Along with Waybig." Gwen blinked. "How did she sneak away?" The redhead shook her head. "Doesn't matter now. How do we find them?" Kevin nodded, though he still looked a bit in shock. "They all still have the sigils, right? The Omnitrix symbols that show up on her. The escape transformations still have those, right?" Kevin asked, his voice shaking. Yes, you should be able to track them on your plumber badges. However, you'll need to get Jen close enough to touch her transformations. The Omnitrix is spending all the excess power it has, keeping her alive. I need to repair this quickly. He tapped a watch around his own wrist, and a few tools materialized. He began to tinker with the watch. Ethan kept Jen's head in his lap as Gwen's phone began to ring. When it rains, it pours, the redhead quipped before answering the phone. Grandpa! Gwen, why isn't Jen answering her phone? Gwen glanced over her shoulder at her still prone cousin. Do you want the short answer or the long one? Short. We don't have time for long ones right now. None of us do. 6-6 and Crab came after Jen. 6-6 got a lucky shot in. He damaged the watch. Grandpa Max swore. Was there another reason you were calling? Vilgax is back. He just issued a Conqueror's challenge to Jen. If she doesn't show up to fight him tomorrow morning, the planet is forfeit. Gwen turned to her unresponsive cousin, who was whimpering as Azimuth worked on the watch. Fuck.